Hey everyone, I'm Shaelin here with Readsy. Today we're going to be talking about upmarket fiction. So in a recent video, we talked about literary genres and just broke down all of the literary genres. And in that video, I talked about the distinction between genre or commercial fiction and literary fiction. But there's actually a genre that sits kind of between the two, and that is upmarket. So this video is going to be focused specifically on upmarket fiction, since it's kind of a unique and interesting genre that I figured it was worth its own video. So the difference between a genre book and a literary book can be really obvious, or in other cases it can be really subtle. Sometimes the line between them can be so blurry that it's fair to wonder if it's okay for a book to have a foot in each camp, and the answer is yes. The term for those books is upmarket. So let's start with a bit of history and talk about where all of these terms came from. So in the 17th and 18th century, the novel as a form kind of was its own genre. So the distinction wasn't, is it genre or literary? The distinction was, is it fiction or non-fiction? Near the end of the 19th century, we saw the emergence of the commercialized novel. We saw the emergence of mass market fiction, which led to the establishment of different literary genres, such as fantasy, sci-fi, mystery, romance, etc., terms that you're probably pretty familiar with, as these genres still exist today. Because writing novels was now commercially viable, some practices were shown to be lucrative. Those practices became repeated, they became recurring tropes, recurring archetypes, and eventually turned into recurring genres. So then, as a response to all of this, some authors, such as Virginia Woolf, established the term literary fiction in opposition because they felt that the novel had become too concerned with replicating what was popular or what would sell well, rather than focusing on the novel as an art form. So that's kind of how we ended up with that distinction. However, because literary fiction is so hard to define, it's a very difficult term to define, there is naturally a gray area between the two. Let's start by talking about commercial or genre fiction. So the main rule of commercial or genre fiction, I'll just call it genre fiction from here on out, it's a little easier, is to put the reader first. Typically, the message of the novel is directly tied to the character's arc and journey. You see more of a reliance on plot and a character who pursues a clear goal with clear defined challenges and antagonistic forces. There's tons of character-driven genre fiction, and I'd say that more and more genre fiction has become increasingly character-driven, to the point that saying literary fiction is character-driven and genre fiction is plot-driven doesn't work at all anymore, because it's just not true. You'll also see the inclusion of genre elements or tropes, and typically a satisfying narrative arc. On the other hand, there's literary fiction. This is fiction that leaves more up to the reader and doesn't necessarily have a clear-cut theme or message. It can't really be classed into a specific genre and doesn't really follow the specific tropes or guidelines of any specific genre. There's an emphasis on form, language, and style, something that is typically meant to be invisible in genre fiction. And although, like I just said, genre fiction is becoming increasingly character-driven, being character-driven is often the point of literary fiction, and there's much less reliance on plot. There's also not really the expectation that it will be an emotionally satisfying narrative arc. The plot is there to serve what we want to reveal or explore about the character, not to be enjoyable in and of itself. So all that said, what is upmarket fiction? Basically, this is a book that appeals to both readers of genre and literary fiction. They're also often referred to as book club. Basically, it's a book that addresses complex themes or messages, and that is an important and core element of the story, but it's still very accessible. Now, upmarket is definitely one of those genres that doesn't really have its own category in a bookstore. You won't walk into a bookstore and find the upmarket shelf. It's often paired with another genre, and if anything, this term is used more by agents or publishers to know how to market a book and who to market a book to. It's a bit of a subtler genre, not really one as obvious as something like fantasy. It probably makes more sense to just look at this by example. Some popular upmarket books that you might be familiar are The Help by Catherine Stockett, Water for Elephants by Sarah Gruen, and Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. So finally, let's just talk for a second about what these classifications mean. Some people don't like these classifications. They think classifying some books as literary is elitist. And I would say, despite the popular argument, the term literary fiction isn't saying that some books are literature and some books aren't. After all, literary and literature aren't the same word. They're different words. I could see where that would come from if there was an entire genre just called literature, but There's not. Like basically any genre, just like fantasy, just like thriller, just like any genre, terms like upmarket and literary are just used to identify a book's target audience, so those books can be marketed properly and so that readers who enjoy reading those types of books can find those books. That's really all those classifications are for. They make some people mad, but there's really no reason to be mad about it. Like all genre labels, they exist for marketing and classification purposes so that people can find books that they like. There is unfortunately a lot of elitism from basically all sides of the coin. You see elitism from people who write basically any genre, and the truth is that even though there is elitism, there doesn't have to be. All these terms are in the end just words, and they don't have to be used in an elitist way if we don't want them to be. None of these genres have more merit or are better inherently, even though some do tend to, win awards and others tend to get way better sales. They're different, they appeal to different readers, and yeah, they work a little differently within publishing, but ultimately as a writer, these terms are there to help you find your target audience. They're there to help you query the right agents. They're there to help you market your book effectively. So that's why it's good to know these terms, know what they mean, and be able to identify accurately if your book is something like upmarket, or if your book is genre, or if your book is literary. So as a bit of a review, upmarket fiction is a literary genre that falls between literary and genre fiction. So basically books that are both literary or genre, or appeal to both genre and literary readers. Genre fiction or commercial fiction is fiction that puts the reader first, follows a compelling, enjoyable narrative arc, while on the other hand, literary fiction leaves more up to the reader to discern, is focused more on style and character development. Upmarket fiction takes qualities from both, so it'll explore complex themes like a literary book, but there's a focus on accessible writing. So that's all for today's video. Have you ever written upmarket fiction? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time, bye.